Hey folks, welcome to another edition of the Healthy Rebellion Radio. We did start a moment ago, but I had some sort of an alert blast on my computer, and I'm hoping it doesn't happen again.
Hopefully it doesn't happen
I'm
again.
not totally sure what I did, but wife, how are you?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm good. You're looking pretty hot in your transition to salt and pepper. Salt and pepper's here, and they're in effect.
The transition.
The transition.
Sounds sort of ominous.
It does. The transition.
It has felt a little ominous at points.
You're owning it, though.
I'm owning
it.
I'm owning it, yeah. And hopefully it won't be too long, given that I don't have long hair. So it might, maybe a year of transition, a year of, sometimes hat days, sometimes letting it all out days.
Sometimes regretting your life even more than you usually do.
Yes.
You okay? Do you need a hug?
No,
I can
I'm
get
good.
one of the kids to hug you. I mean, I'm not really feeling up to it right now. But
I'm good, babe. I'm good.
Okay, cool. I want to support you.
Yeah,
Just not
you're so supportive.
too much.
Oh, so supportive.
Yeah.
What do you got for us here for our news topic?
News topic is a Guardian piece. Veganuary is huge.
Veganuary.
But is it really as simple as animal food's bad, plant food's good? It's a nice piece, and it's good to see a little bit of pushback on this stuff. There's just such a wall of assumption that animal products are terrible for your health, that they're going to destroy the environment and all the rest of that. And there's just a lot of detail and nuance from the piece. They just had some interesting stuff. And this is what's crazy. And there have been some pieces that basically make the case that the way that veganism is being pushed is it is not kissing cousins, like great friends with Monsanto and herbicide and stuff like that, because that's the only fucking way that you can make that work at scale. Like it is the cornerstone of our industrial food system,
the monocropping
monocrop deal. Yeah, and that is what people are advocating for more of, in addition to just some leaked material that these companies have a goal of owning the intellectual property around our food. And so this
what could go wrong with that?
Yeah, what could possibly go wrong with that? It reminds me of a Total Recall, where the people living on Mars, they would like cut off the oxygen to them to keep everybody in line and stuff like that.
The only thing I remember from Total Recall is like the eyeball getting pulled out through the nose, right? Like,
right.
That's
right.
Yeah, I need to watch it again.
Yeah. Well,
clearly.
I think it was a probe, but yeah,
okay.
Something like that. But from the article, just when ultra-processed food manufacturers were being skewered for the health damage their products cause, the plant-based push has given them a get-out-of-jail-free card. It's a pity that the public food discourse has become so binary. Animal food's bad, plant food's good. Perhaps it's time to reacquaint ourselves with the defining characteristics of food that keeps us and the planet healthy. Whether it comes from a plant or the animal kingdom is irrelevant. What really matters is how that food is produced. It's not the cow, it's the how. Mm-hmm. And just as a side note on that, there have been a good number of people, sometimes in fairly lofty positions, that have been pinching a lot of Diana Rogers' work around Sacred Cow. And so if you folks see that, if you see some of her work unattributed, jump on
speak
people
up
with both feet and speak up. Yeah, Diana is incredibly talented, super creative.
She has been working her ass off for the last 3-4 years on this film, and then also with you on this book. And she deserves all the credit she can get for the work that she's doing. And if you don't follow her on Instagram at Sustainable Dish, she's putting out amazing content, infographics, blog posts, and it's just, her work is so important.
She's kind of fighting the fight that nobody else takes the time or has the wherewithal to fight. And so at a minimum, we as a larger community need to give attribution where it's due, because she, again, most people may not know, she has a really pretty advanced art background before she got into science and dietetics and all that type of stuff. And so she's able to take an angle on this material that just nobody else does. And it's been popping up a lot where folks just throw her material into their posts. And it's cool on the one hand. I've been torn on this, because on the one hand, it's cool because this message is
it's
getting
exposing
out.
it to broader audiences, bigger audiences than ours, bigger audiences than hers.
Yeah. So I don't want to be a dick as far as that goes, but at the same time, it's not a difficult thing to go to provide some attribution on this stuff. So anyway, and again, we have this Guardian
January
piece in the
linked in the show notes.
But this is a case that isn't really being talked about in the pushback against veganism to the degree that folks feel inclined to do that. And I think that there's a really powerful case to do that. But this notion that what's being put forward is basically row crops as far as the eye can see. And, like all this stuff with James Cameron, there was a guy that I'm supposed to have a debate with at some point on Instagram that was defending the fact that he has like $140 million position in this pea protein company. And I'm like, that is not a whole unprocessed food. Why doesn't he just recommend like
peas,
lentils or split peas or something? And so it's kind of bullshit. And I think that both that and kind of the entitlement privilege angle of veganism mainly being white and wealthy and all the rest of that, interesting angles to take on this stuff. But yeah.
Okay, let's move on to our iTunes Healthy Rebellion Radio t-shirt review winner. This award goes to App User 3, and the review says, "Awesome. Please keep up the foul language. Those of us who do not have a cob up our bums are not bothered by it."
God bless you, App User 3.
Yes, that one definitely made us chuckle, and thank you, App User 3. Send us an email to hello@robbwolf.com with your t-shirt size and your mailing address, and we will send you a Healthy Rebellion Radio t-shirt. All right. This episode of the Healthy Rebellion Radio is sponsored by Perfect Keto. Perfect Keto makes snacking on keto easy with their keto bars, nut butters, trail mix, and chocolate-covered nuts. And the best part is that Perfect Keto products are super clean. They don't contain any soy, dairy, gluten, artificial sweeteners, binding agents, or anything that doesn't directly improve your health. And their keto trail mix actually is quite tasty. It's like a nice combo of pumpkin seeds, chocolate covered pumpkin seeds, roasted almonds, macadamia nuts.
The kids really
coconut
like it,
flakes.
and they're kind of finicky with stuff like that, which I can't. As a kid, anything that looked like trail mix, like I could basically go head first into a 50-gallon barrel of it and just come out once it was empty. But those are our kids, so
yeah. And it doesn't have, for those who are sensitive to sweeteners, no sugar alcohols, no stevia. I think it has yacon, as the primary sweetener. So those are super tasty. You can go to perfectketo.com/rebellion10 and use code rebellion10 for $10 off orders of $40 or more.
Awesome.
And our questions for today, shall we go there, babe?
Sure. Why not?
All right. Our first one is from Stephen on estrogen and soy. Stephen says, "I'm wondering how much you've researched about the relationship between soy and estrogen and or its estrogen mimicking characteristics. This would be an interesting thing to explore and explain on a Q&A podcast. Thanks." Yeah,
it's interesting when and I dug into this stuff a lot more 10, 15 years ago, actually. And genistein and some of these other soy isoflavones are non-trivial estrogenic agents. And what's interesting when you poke around in the literature, there's instances where it appears that they could play a beneficial role in some cases. Like in PCOS, there's some suggestion that these agents mitigate some of the effects of PCOS, and there's some other situations where they have efficacy. But what is typically happening there is an estrogen dominant situation in women, and although these soy isoflavones have an estrogenic effect, they work as what's called a competitive inhibitor. So they occupy the binding site, and although they do have an estrogen signal, it's weaker than the estrogen molecule itself. So in certain situations, it can actually mitigate some problems, but I would still argue that you're you're basically covered. It's a symptom relief story. You're not addressing the foundational
Root cause.
root cause problem there. And then we have some other linkages to thyroid dysregulation and some gut health issues. Soy is one of the most common allergens. Like it's a close race between it and peanuts is one of the most common allergens. So you've got a bunch of different problems there, but it is interesting. Even some folks have put forward the use of certain isoflavones in the situations of like menopause or perimenopause. I would make the case that seeking out a good functional medicine practitioner, getting your numbers run, and then using things like bioidentical hormones and having some sort of a pulsatile release, that makes a lot more sense. And I think that the literature supports that and the anecdote supports that. So yeah, I mean, the estrogenic effects of soy are real. They're non-trivial. There are situations in which it looks like they could be beneficial, but in my opinion, that's largely, it's not addressing the root cause in that situation, which doesn't mean that you always have to go down that route. Like my improvement with Imodium and my digestion, I'm still kind of perplexed about that. Should I need to use an outside agent to normalize my digestion? Well, I don't know. Need gets kind of wacky. It's when I use it, I feel better. My digestion is better. My whole affect is better. And I use like 2 to 4 milligrams of it a day. So I don't want to get like polypurist about it and just say, well, any outside thing isn't a good idea, because it can be under certain circumstances. But there is also a decent amount of literature that casts kind of a dark shadow over the use of soy, particularly long term.
Okay. Let's see. Our next question is, what causes insulin resistance? From Frank. Hello, Rob and Nikki. I'm currently studying kinesiology, and there's one question I cannot get my head around. What causes insulin resistance? From my research, there are 2 schools of thought. One is the repeated exposure of high insulin levels cause the cells to downregulate, resulting in insulin resistance. The other school of thought is that the fat cells and the liver cells is so full of lipids that insulin physically cannot push more sugar or fat into the cell. If the first is true, why some other peptide hormones like growth hormones does not seem to downregulate when there is a chronic level of high exposure? People who even abuse MK677, a growth hormone secretagogue, they do not seem to have a growth hormone sensitivity downregulation. The only studies I could find is growth hormones insensitivity due to genetics. Some steroid hormones even upregulate the receptor when exposing chronically, like testosterone. If the second school of thought is true, why are there people who are lean and work out but start developing insulin resistance? Many distance runners start developing insulin resistance even though they train heavily. I wish to hear your thoughts. Thank you. I love the work you are doing, and I learned so much from your talks and Q&A.
Really great question, and it's actually a lot of material to unpack. And this is some of the interesting stuff about just kind of science and research. There's a lot of different routes to developing insulin resistance: sleep deprivation, stress, overfeeding, becoming very, very lean, and so which itself can become a stress. And so maybe backing up a little bit, back in the early 2000s, I was definitely in the insulin resistance as a downregulation process due to exposure, and did seminars talking about that. And then people like the Kraken, Matt Lalonde, got in and really looked at this stuff, and he was like, I think we're missing something here. And so the insulin hypothesis stuff has definitely gone out of vogue for me. It seemed to fit a lot of things, but there were a lot of glaring gaps with the hypothesis. And so in an overfed state scenario, insulin resistance, from my best understanding of this, is it's interesting. It's kind of counterintuitive, because it kind of boils down to an insulin sensitive person who is overeating gains weight easier than an insulin resistant person. And this kind of like blows people away. If you are insulin sensitive, you are generally more anabolically like primed, and that weight gain could be muscle or fat. And as you become insulin resistant, you can make the case that it's an effort on the part of the body to try to mitigate the further input of nutrients into the body. And there's this concept called the personal fat threshold. And yeah, again, the insulin hypothesis was so compelling and so steep things that now when you put this kind of personal fat threshold forward, it's kind of like, wait a second, did I really hear that? It's like you missed the punchline for a joke. But this personal fat threshold story makes the case that depending on the individual, they will be able to gain weight up to a point. This is in the overfed state. They can gain weight up to a point in which their personal fat threshold is met. And then this is where we start seeing blood sugars elevate and circulating triglycerides and lipoproteins, because the body is trying to stick this excess caloric load somewhere. And what's interesting is depending on your ancestry and your genetics, you may have a personal fat threshold that allows you to gain enormous amounts of weight before over insulin resistance sets in. So these folks that get 400, 500, 600 pounds, they typically, although overfed, they have an ability to continue remaining insulin sensitive. And they have things like hyperplasia, the splitting of fat cells, so that a fat cell can only get so large before it becomes kind of non-functional for adding more fat to it. But if that cell can split, then you have two of them that
twice
can
as
get
many.
large. And so some people, some of the thought around that personal fat threshold is that some people are quite good at the adipocyte hyperplasia and creating more fat cells. The bummer with that is once you got them. And so your propensity for regaining body fat is even greater. So you lose that weight. But if you screw up a little bit, then you can regain that pretty quickly. People of Indian, Pakistani descent, specifically, they tend to have a very low personal fat threshold before insulin resistance sets in. So this is where, at a population level, looking at things like BMI are really misleading, because these folks are typically, from a body mass index, a height to weight perspective, they're not particularly overweight. They may even be underweight, because these people also tend to have significant sarcopenia. They've lost muscle mass in the whole process of this thing going on, yet are wickedly insulin resistant. And I'm kind of like this in that if I overeat, I start seeing my lipoproteins and lipids go up, my blood pressure goes up, I start having really significant problems. I would probably never be able to make it to 300 pounds, because I would probably die before I got there from cardiovascular disease or something like that. So that's kind of one chunk of where the insulin resistant story comes from. In the case of really lean athletes, we kind of have two inputs there that are stressors that feeds into developing insulin resistance. And insulin resistance is kind of you could think about it as kind of a hedging of bets against stress. And so like physiological insulin resistance that comes about from fasting and or occasionally low carb diets, it's partitioning glucose for those cells that must use glucose. And then kind of a similar effect is occurring in very lean, high motor output athletes. And so this is kind of that diminishing returns that we see with regards to leanness. Some people typically get healthier at a certain degree of leanness, but it's not an infinite slope with that.
Because more lean doesn't always mean more healthy.
Correct. Yeah. If you're a male and you're at 20% body fat, you will probably be significantly healthier if you get to 10% body fat. You will not necessarily be significantly healthier at 5% body fat. So, yeah, so it's interesting stuff. And Peter Attia, he just did a podcast with a guy, Ethan Weiss, and they actually talk about some of the growth hormone receptor considerations of insulin resistance and a bunch of other stuff too. The front half of that podcast is very kind of cardiology dense, which I think is super valuable to listen to anyway. But if you do check that one out and you're only interested in kind of the endocrinology, you have to go about an hour into it before you get to that.
Gotcha. Great.
But good question. Who was that from?
That was
again?
Frank. Yeah. All right, it's time for the Healthy Rebellion Radio Trivia.
Ding, 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 ding,
ding. Our episode sponsor, Perfect Keto, is giving Robb's favorite salted caramel MCT oil powder to 3 lucky winners selected at random who answer the following question correctly. Robb, what is a one word that you always mispronounce?
We fiddled and farted on this and didn't really come up with much, but we remembered our good friend Greg Everett.
And if you all have been around since the earlier days of the Paleo Solution podcast, you will remember Greg.
And his
witticisms.
His witticisms and also his Jedi-level understanding of
grammar.
And grammar Nazi isn't even like...
No.
Yeah, he's the grammar ubermensch.
I don't know. Yeah, something.
Yeah. So Greg would correct one and all on the word
forte.
Well, most people say forte. But he insists that it's pronounced fort, which makes a lot of sense when you
in
think
Italian,
about,
it's forte, like your strength. So, fort.
So, even though that's not one that I mispronounce now because Greg would stomp a giant hole in my ass.
I still mispronounce it because I think it sounds better as forte, but what the hell?
There you go. So, fort or forte, whatever it is.
So to play, go to robwolf.com/trivia and enter your answer. We will randomly select 3 people with the correct answer to win Perfect Keto's salted caramel MCT oil powder.
It's delicious.
The cutoff to answer this week's trivia and be eligible to win is February 20th at midnight. Winners will be notified via email, and we'll also announce the winners on Instagram as well. And this is open to residents of the U.S. only.
There you have it.
Alrighty. Our third question this week is on the topic of weight loss, resistance, and detox kits from Amanda. Hi, Robb and Nikki. After my 3rd child and 3rd cesarean section, I couldn't lose all of the baby weight. Even after almost 3 years, no amount of Whole30 rounds, paleo, or exercise is helping me to lose the baby pooch. A friend of mine, who is also my chiropractor, recommended that I do a detox that he coaches called True Cellular Detox. He believes hormone imbalances due to toxins in my body are what are causing my weight loss resistance. I am a little skeptical. What are your thoughts on these detox kits? Are there other ways of handling weight loss resistance without all of these supplements? I appreciate your help, Amanda from New Hampshire.
Yeah, so man, am I a fan of detoxes?
Not really.
Not really.
No.
It's in the same genre as biohacking, and we would probably have a private island in the Bahamas had I just been able to shelve a little bit of
integrity. I don't know what is
integrity, silly shit like that. Is the process of detoxification really important for our health and life? Yes, absolutely. But the body is generally really good at it. And the funny thing about that is if you want to enhance detox, you actually want a significant amount of protein in your diet because so much of that plays into the production of glutathione and making sure that superoxide dismutase is upregulated. And there's things like alpha-lipoic acid that you can put in the mix to help augment that, making sure you get enough selenium. But that's just some kind of basic nutritional support that's going on. So if this problem is about hormones, and it is true that like some amount of our hormone status can be related to the way that the liver removes or modifies hormones and whatnot, like sex hormone binding globulin and all that. But it seems suspicious to me that you hang this on hormones, yet don't test hormones. Like it would be nice to know where we are in that story. And then if we were going to drop in a detox, then you would check it afterwards. But I suspect that folks don't do that because this ends up having fuck all to do with hormones at the end of the day. So I'm just not really a fan of this stuff. And really at the end of the day, typically what happens with these detoxes is they're very low or no calorie intake.
A bunch of supplements. Which, funny enough, no matter how theoretically downregulated somebody's thyroid is, if you starve them, they will lose body fat. They will lose everything else too. But I'm wondering, Amanda, I'm wondering about a couple things. Sleep, which is a huge one. And given that you have 3 children, I'm assuming that sleep is probably not always as great as you'd like it to be.
We have just real quick on that point. We have a 7 and 5-year-old. They tend to sleep pretty well. last night, Sagan woke up in the middle of the night, jumped in bed with us, and now she's big enough that it's like, I can't sleep
and
in there.
she sleeps sideways, so she's got her feet on.
Spins like the Exorcist.
Feet on one of us,
so,
and so it's not comfortable.
I just bailed out of there and went and slept on the couch because I'm like, okay, she had a nightmare or something. But so we're at year 5 of the youngest, year 7 for the oldest, and we still don't always get great sleep.
Right.
And without a doubt, it affects our body composition and recovery.
And then the other thought that I have for you, Amanda, is you mentioned exercise, and I'm just curious. I'd be curious to know what you're doing for exercise, and ideally getting in some strength training and, lifting weights, deadlifts, squat, presses.
Do you want to share a little bit of what you've been up to in that regard?
Just some kind of volume work with a variety of exercises. So, and I'm trying to do it movement snack style, like in the middle of the day, because sometimes it's hard. The time that we have to train, ideally we're doing jujitsu because that's what we really enjoy. So if we have like an hour to go do that, then that's what we do. The gym's getting up and running, but we have been doing a little bit of that in the garage. But as far as strength work, I can go out in the garage, I can do 10 deadlifts with the kettlebell, or I can load a barbell and do rounds of that. So maybe 5 rounds of 10, supersetted with some body rows or some press, chins, and just kind of rotating each day with whatever the movement is. So, and then, my goal is, because I haven't been consistently strength training, like given the move and all that, it's like been a year since I've like really been on a program and training.
Honestly, like since we've had kids, you haven't.
It's been pretty sporadic. It's been pretty sporadic, and I've prioritized going to jujitsu over my strength training. So now I'm trying to get that back in, and instead of, I used to lift reasonably heavy. Instead of jumping right back in there, and trying to push hard on the loading side, I'm really trying to just be really I don't want to get injured. I want to get all my connective tissue strong again. So I'm starting really conservatively on the loading and just working volume. And then each week I'm trying to add 5 pounds and go again.
And you've been kind of stair-stepping that up, where you'll do like 7 rounds of 5 or 10 on a given movement, and then maybe 9 and then 10 over the course of a couple of weeks. And then you'll bump the load
And then
up.
I go the load up. Yeah, I'll do like five sets of 5 reps. It depends on what the movement is. If squats, I've been doing 5 sets of 5 reps as at the first load, which I started at 45-pound front squats, reasonably light for me, but I, again, like wanting to just have a long run at this. And then the next week it was 7 sets of 5 reps at 45 pounds, and then 10, and then jumping up
and
to
then it pumped up
50 pounds.
Yeah.
Like I'm super slow. Like this, I know people listening are probably like, oh my gosh, that's like such a slow.
But if you do this over the course of
ramp
a
up.
year, then you're going to be doing sets with 155 pounds,
Right.
which is non-freaking trivial
Right.
for,
Right. And I just find like it's easy to, when you're busy and you're stressed and you're trying to push things too hard, it's really easy to go do something and then tweak something, and then you're out for 3 weeks, and then that's setting you back. So I'm like, no ego about the load, and I'm in my garage. There's nobody watching me. I'm telling all you that I'm lifting 45 pounds at a front squat, which, but no, it's just where I chose to start, and am just slowly ramping that up.
And how is your body responding?
Great.
Yeah,
I feel good. Like I wake up the next day, I'm not sore. I can go back into the garage and train and get more done.
Like you're
and
leaning out, and you're clearly putting on muscle mass.
Because I was definitely lose that, and like all the stuff that you've been doing with your longevity talk and this book that you're doing with Dr. Ken Ford on sarcopenia. I'm like, holy shit. Like I used to carry a decent amount of muscle, and I've not like I've gained a bunch of weight, but I've lost that muscle mass, and that's been like, okay, that has to stop.
This is our window of opportunity.
I'm 42, and like if I go another 5-10 years of not really being mindful of my muscle mass, like that could put me into a deficit as I age.
Amanda,
so sleep, sorry, really long, but like figuring out all the things you can do to really protect your sleep as best as you can with 3 kids. So all of this sleep hygiene stuff that I know that if you've been listening for a while, I'm sure you recall, but like the, consistent bedtime, ideally some blue blockers at night, no devices, no TV in your room, no lights in your room, like super dark as a cave, cool environment. So try to protect your sleep as best you can, and then really look at your exercise routine and see about if you're not already doing some really smart strength work.
Mm-hmm. And I'll throw one final thought in there, which is jam over to the Ketones macronutrient calculator, put in all your data, and then set it for a mild caloric restriction, about 10%. And what happens in that scenario is people are kind of floored by how few calories that thing recommends. And this is also why Tyler and Luis get such damn good results, because they're not overfeeding their folks when the goal is body composition change. Get adequate protein, but you've got to have
focus
a
on the
mild caloric
protein.
restriction.
Always focus on the protein.
Yeah.
Okay. So Amanda, actually, like if you implement that stuff, we'd love to hear back from you. So please give it a couple of months and then ping us back and let us know how you're doing. Let's see. Our fourth question is from Raisha. Hi, Rob. I love listening to your podcast. It has educated me so much, and you've become my number one source of all things nutrition. Thank you. I eat really well most of the time, 80% paleo, but with some cheese and peanut butter every day. I try to keep sugar to a minimum, but I include some fruit and gluten-free crackers in my diet as well. I live away from home for most of the year and tend to go back to my hometown about 2 to 3 times a year. Whenever I do go home, my diet is a little relaxed. Specifically, I tend to consume more sugar and sugary beverages. This isn't every day, but it does happen a couple of times a week. I was just wondering if this sort of thing can leave a lasting effect on my metabolism. More broadly, does eating bad a couple of times a month leave a lasting effect on my metabolism or health if I tend to eat relatively well most of the time? Do you have any advice to better approach my diet? Hope you can help me with this. Thanks again for all you are doing, and come to Asia one day.
We'll do it. We may not come back, so let us in and we may not leave. This is really interesting stuff, and I can hear folks like in the evidence-based nutrition scene, like their eye roll is so loud and profound over this that it's virtually deafening. It's like, oh, well, of course this wouldn't be a problem. And what's interesting to me about some of this stuff, if we really want to get in and kind of geek out on it a little bit, when I was at the last year's UCSF Evolutionary Medicine Conference, I got to hang out with Erica Sonnenberg, and the Sonnenberg Lab is arguably the best regarded gut microbiome lab on the planet. They're doing all the work with like the HUDSA and the Human Gut Project. They have amazing information. She shared with me this data that the HUDSA are kind of revered for their super diverse, interesting, microbiota, and they're kind of held up as it's seemingly an example of what we should all be shooting for. They have a very high fiber diet and all this type of stuff. What was interesting is there was somehow, even though these folks are pretty self-sufficient, they ended up being the recipients of some sort of like United Nations grain relief program. And so they got like a giant bolus of corn. And granted, this is like big corn, like hominy corn, not processed. Mm-hmm. You basically cook it as a porridge. It's about as whole and unprocessed as you could imagine. But over the course of just a matter of about 10 days, the HUDSA's gut biome started westernizing from eating a bunch of this corn. And again, this is something that's about as unprocessed and natural, and
especially relative to gluten-free crackers and peanut butter and cheese.
Absolutely, yeah. And so they were kind of like, wow. And now the thing is that with changes in the gut microbiome, we just flat don't know what the story is with regards to what does it matter. We do a round of antibiotics and it changes. We go out and get a tan and it changes. We sneeze and it changes. And so the fact that the gut microbiome changes it seems to be kind of like the one rule to it. Like it's always going to change. But it definitely shifted in what we would consider to be a more westernized profile, which typically tends to be more pro-inflammatory and potentially problematic. And it doesn't take much to start shifting people down that direction. So this has been something that I've been somewhat perplexed on. It's like, well, what is the safe, reasonable addition of processed foods such that we don't start setting that process up? And I wouldn't be surprised if the answer is effectively none. Like and the thing about that is that even in this description here, this is a fairly serial event. You know, now again, at the end of the day, what is this ultimately going to mean for performance, health, and longevity? Like, is eating some gluten-free crackers taking 10 years off your life? Fuck no, not saying that. But it might have some knock-on effects elsewhere. But there's also kind of a reality that we do live in a modern world, and the degree of rigidity that might be necessary to 100% protect oneself from deleterious effects is probably enough that then you are so socially isolated that you die because it's like you're in
your
solitary
lack of community. Yeah.
You know, nobody wants to hang out with you. But again, like, so this is where I kind of end up siding with the evidence-based nutrition people to some degree, where it's
Wait,
like,
did you just say that?
to some degree, every once in a while, even a broken clock is correct twice a day.
You heard it, folks.
But I think being honest, it's like you can't also just say, well, there's going to be absolutely no downside to this. Say if you are an evidence-based person, there is actually no evidence to support your supposition that there is going to inherently be no downside. We just don't know. I think that it's reasonable at kind of an instinctive level to say, well, a little bit of latitude isn't going to be that big of a deal. And there's also our super purist people are going to freak out, but like Risha mentioned, like sugary beverages. At this stage of my life, I just can't figure out why people don't do diet soda. If you're going to do a soda, like I just
or a Zevia
or something like that. Something. You've been on a little bit of a vodka tonic tear, and we get it sugar-free tonic, and because regular tonic, like it has like twice as much sugar as like a Coke. So and again, the uber purists will be like, oh, aspartame alters your gut microbiome and it's a neurotoxin. It's like, well, okay, everything alters your gut microbiome. Again, what is the greater context here? I guarantee you drinking high fructose corn syrup alters your gut microbiome, and it's setting you up for non-alcoholic fatty liver disease and a bunch of other stuff. Just have this sneaky suspicion that like sugar-free beverages are probably a better option than sugared beverages. So even in this mitigating process, like I would shift to a sugar-free beverage. And on those days that you're going to kick your heels up, like we've had some friends in town recently, and we know that we will be going out for a pretty extensive dinner and drinks. And I might typically still have breakfast, but I may have no lunch, and it may be a small breakfast because I know that evening I'm going to kind of burn it all down. And so there's some kind of mitigating strategies that we can do around that. And if we know anything about this stuff, if you're going to eat crap, just eat less of it. And there's less of an effect there.
And try to get some movement in beforehand.
Try to get some movement in before or afterwards. Yeah, go for a walk, all that type of stuff. But it's an interesting question. And again, I think, not to say that I'm implicitly correct about this stuff, but I think if you're going to give stuff like this a really thorough, honest unpacking, it's a complex topic. Even this thing of, is a little bit of food on the, bad food on the side, is it a trivial thing or a non-trivial thing? And it kind of depends. And
it'd be one really thing. Risha hasn't said that she's, struggling to lose body fat or anything like that. So it'd be one thing if you had excess body fat that you were really trying to lose, and then we'd look at the peanut butter and the cheese and your total caloric intake and all of that and dig there. But this seemed more like she was just curious if there was going to be some sort of problem down the road, health-wise, longevity-wise, doing this.
Right.
Cool. All right. Our fifth and final question for this week is from Josh, and he says he's not chasing ketones or bullshit. Hey guys, love your info that you give out. Keep it up. Let me get to it. 1, I'm a 47-year-old high school weight training teacher, non-Hodgkin's lymphoma dominator of 2012, bodybuilder, and cross-country coach. I work really hard on both ends of my fitness, both with weights and with trying to keep up with my kids that I coach. Typical summer day is lift hard and heavy for an hour, sauna, run for a minimum of 20, or on the top end, 60 minutes. I have a 6-pack and I weigh 170 pounds. I'm 5'8". I adopted a GAPS diet 5 years ago, keto about 3 years ago, and for the last year and a half, I've been carnivore, and more recently, 10 months, nose to tail carnivore. I've always been military strict about my diet. I'm very aware of my electrolyte intake, sodium, potassium, and magnesium and calcium, and I found a good balance so far. My question is that I've always had a hard time getting into nutritional ketosis from the start. My ketones are at 0.2 and my blood sugar. Okay, so not chasing ketones or BS in the title that I read. I said bullshit and it was actually meant to be blood sugar. Oops. Now that I'm into the question,
the bullshit made more sense in the original context.
Well, in the title that we have here. Yeah. Okay, so it is actually blood sugar. So my ketones are at 0.2 and my blood sugar is at 100, always or above, no matter what. Pre-post weights, after runs, or middle of the night. What the heck? I'm trying to be in ketosis for cancer reasons, but I still want gains. I'm eating 65% fat, beef, trim, and butter, 30% protein, and the rest carbs or less. Total calories are about 2,800 on average, depending on my training cycle. Genes, diet, too much meat. Do I need to supplement with MCT? I'm tired of trying to figure it out on my own.
Man, this is one of those things where if we ever get the technology figured out on the call-in show,
do the live calls again,
there's a lot of questions that I would want to have on this. It's very rare that I recommend genetic testing. I think that can just muddy the waters remarkably, but there are a few different genotypes around the fat mobilizing genes and whatnot that could really be at play in a story like this. Another thing that could be interesting is actually an aggressive carnitine supplementation regimen. We need carnitine to shuttle most fats into the mitochondria to be used for fuel. Supplementation with carnitine could help in this regard. The addition of the MCT could goose the ketogenic state. What would be interesting for me in this scenario is to see what a fasted state looks like. And again, it's funny. Like, I'm not really have been a huge fan of fasting of late. You know, it's like, yeah, some, but I think people are just going super overboard on it. But this would be interesting because it's like, even in a fasted state, are you able to get some ketones then? And if not, is it just like dinging the liver and causing kind of a stress response of glucose? And so I'm not entirely sure how to tackle this. Certainly could try additional MCT just to try to goose the ketogenic level. Looking at fasting would be interesting to just see what the numbers do in that scenario. And then this would be something that doing a run through like DNA Fit, it's a UK-based outfit. They actually do a nice analysis of their own with regards to what macros you probably will do better with. And it was interesting. It prescribed a low-carb diet for me based off of my genetics. And so confirmation bias, or it's actually, on point, you pick. But those are some things that I would tinker with or think about, or I would be curious about to continue to unpack this.
All right, Josh.
I'm going to steal your water.
Yeah, there's a little bit of lemon juice in it.
Perfect.
All right, Josh. Let us know.
I would like
some
to follow
fasting
up on this.
And then retest and let us know what your numbers are.
I'd be inclined to give Josh a month or two of free access to the Healthy Rebellion if he circles back up with us, because I would be interested to unpack this stuff. Okay. So if you're willing to do some of this follow-up and you're willing to share it with the folks in the Rebellion, I'd be happy to let you in so that we could unpack this stuff.
Okay.
Yeah.
I think that was our last question for the week.
Cool.
Awesome. So thanks everyone for listening. Please share this episode or share one of your favorite episodes. We're really wanting to spread this message and get the word out. So we would appreciate if you leave us a review, subscribe, and share with a friend. And make sure to check out our show sponsor, Perfect Keto, for all your keto needs at perfectketo.com/rebellion10 and use code rebellion10 for $10 off your order of $40 or more. And finally, join us over in the Healthy Rebellion. We've
Fun
got
stuff going on.
A lot of great stuff. We're just, actually, when this airs, we will be just finishing up our 7-day carb test as part of our first 30-day reset 7-day carb test that we did together as a group inside of the Rebellion. So we're excited to see the results that come from that, and we'll share that with everybody. But yeah, hope you all have a fabulous weekend.
Take care, guys.
Bye.
Bye.